So I'd like to now tie in that demonstration back in with our swatch study and show you how I study from photographs using this information. So this is just a quick color study. And what I love about these color studies is, first of all, the canvas is very small. That's probably about a 600 pixel canvas. And you do not really need to draw well. You can just do the very basic amount of drawing, and you can still do a very convincing replication of the color. Now, I'm not sampling from the photograph. I'm trying to remember what I've learned from sampling that photograph. So you can see, as you remember, there are warm lights in the light and cooler color temperatures in the shadow. So I'm kind of putting myself in that ballpark. Hopefully you can get a sense of that. How I begin is giving myself kind of a quick comparison of warm temperatures versus cool. So you can see I've blocked in the kind of the big shadow area, and now I'm working a little more in depth into the light, and expanding my context of color temperatures that are in this painting. Again, it doesn't matter what the exact color is. I don't need to sample from the photo. All I need to do is get the relationships right, getting myself in the appropriate category of either warmth or coolness. And we're going to keep dialing into that so we can further our understanding of it. But this is a good photo to study from because it's a very generic separation of warm and cool. So I'm just blocking in some big shapes. That's the other thing I like about this photo. It's got a lot of big shapes, not a whole lot of small things that can trip you up. So just blocking in some, of course, the shadow on the cliff in light. It's still going to be a cooler temperature, right? And just blocking in, there's a lot of greenery, which means I can play a lot with different kinds of green. Of course, when it's in the light, they're all going to be greens that veer towards the warm side, the yellow side. And in shadows, you can see I've actually already really pushed those greens to be closer to blue. I like to push the difference. That's another thing you can do when you're studying from a photo to really understand it. Try and push it even further than the photo actually is. But push it in the direction that the photo's already going, you know? That's something that you can actually observe better from life. Your eyes register this a little more truly than photos do. But of course, we can't paint from life. This is online, so I have to use photos. I have a few different texture brushes that I keep going to. Probably the same 3 or 4 brushes I'll use all the time. And they just give me some unpredictable patterns, different edges, and just helps me create quicker. You know, if I just use like a round brush, I'd have to do too much editing, but a lot of different brushes give me different shapes and different kind of edge and just keep the interest going. So, you know, anything I'm doing here should not come as any shock to anyone. It's like right now I'm in half tone. That's shadow actually right there. So this is still a bit of half tone, bit of shadow. Here's some average light coming in for the trees. This is some red rooftops. I'm just improvising a little bit here. There's a little red in the photo, but I wanted to just bring it out a little more in my study, just for fun. Again, this is not a quote-unquote good drawing. It's just very basic blocks of shape. But in the end, that's actually what a painting is. Of course, you can refine from here, but this is just a quick study. This is not meant for refinement. It's just meant to test what I think I've learned. Here's some just a little lighter bit of leaves coming in. I don't know. I wouldn't call that a highlight. I'd call it just a emphasis of the average light value. Getting in some yellower green just to really push the influence of the sun there. And just a few tree branches, picking a warm light. Now I'm back in shadow. This is reflected light. So reflected light is a little lighter, and because it's coming from the sky a lot in this case, it's very blue. You can see a lot of, I'm really in the blues. I'm in the purples now, or this is dark accent here with the airbrush, just helping route one surface to another. Just getting those crevices, wherever there's a crevice, underneath the trees or underneath where the wall hits the street. Just like that, I'm back into, you know, average light here, just refining shapes, because you're always dealing with shapes, right? Even though my shapes are blobby and just blocked in, I still want to make an attempt at good shapes, you know, even though I might not have time to do total refinement. Here's the little cars coming in. Reflected light makes their tops bluer. So when I say something like reflected light, that's a value. And I hope you've watched that YouTube video I referred you to earlier, which identifies all those values and where they go. So speaking of values, I'll check my values here by switching this to grayscale. And then we're back, and I'm just selecting out the shadow, and I'm just going to do a quick brightness contrast just to darken the shadows just a bit, just to separate my values. It helps punch it out. See that? It really helped. And just like that, we have our finish. It really doesn't take much to quickly grab a photo and do a quick study from it. And just for the occasion, I wanted to show you how I actually took this very photo and arrived at something more finished from it. This is a painting I did back in, I think, 2010 or 2009. It was quite a few years ago now, but you can see how the lighting and the information are very closely aligned with what we saw in that photo. And this photo was actually the inspiration for this painting. As far as I'm concerned, there's really no difference between this painting and my study, except for that this painting is just more finished in terms of shape refinement and edge refinement. But in terms of color, all the information in this painting is still contained in my little study. So let's take a look at a cool light. This is a overcast day, as we can see by the sky, or a very cloudy day, a day where there's no sunlight. This is what I would call a cooler light, because the light is only coming from the sky, and it's coming from all 360 degrees, and as we sample the sky, we can see it's this kind of grayish blue. It's definitely completely opposite of the sun, which was like over here, right? This time we're dealing with a bluish light, which was called a cooler light. So let's do our study. And the other thing interesting about this photo is as I sample everything in the light, it's a little harder to determine what's in light. And the way you do it when the light is so soft like this, like overcast light makes a very diffuse kind of light, very soft light. The way to determine what's in light is anything that's clearly facing up. So like the sand, I'm not going to just pick any sand because these footsteps are going to actually create some shadows. But in this area, I can get things that face up. And when I sample the grass here, the weeds, whatever those are, anything that's clearly going to get light directly from the sky, I'm going to sample that. And this is interesting because the reeds is actually a warm local color. It's kind of an orangey kind of vegetation, right? So this is going to be an interesting task. How does a orange become cooler? And we'll find out in a second. But first, I'm, like I did before, shutting off my brain, and I'm just sampling colors that I think are in the light. And now let's get into shadow. Now shadow, again, it's a little harder to ascertain what's in shadow, and just look at the form. It's whatever turns under, right? So any part of that grass that's facing the planes that are facing away, it's going to be in shadow. Even the sand will have shadow, like where the footprints are. So now that we have our sampling part done, we can go to the analytics phase. Let's bring up our color picker. And I like to hide the photograph just so we're not focused on it. We're looking at what we've sampled. And I'll start with the light, just like I did before. Now let's look at, first of all, let's take the sand colors. These are the sand colors that I sampled. And look at that. It's, when you think sand, you probably think brown, right? You probably think it's got a brown local color. But look at how wrong that assumption would be in this light. This is a cooler light. We determined that the light temperature from the sky is around here. I just sampled the sky to get this. So if this is like the color of our bully, well, it's taking what is, brownish sand and pulling it. So let's say the local color of sand, you might say, is like this. Our sky, the bully, is pulling that so strongly up into the blues. And we can see how much influence that cool light has had. Now let's look at the grass, the orange grass stuff. Okay, now this is a little different because this is, like I said, a local color that is warm already. It's kind of warm by default. And you look at that and you're kind of like, oh, that's kind of a warm color. Is this going to break your rules? Well, no, because look at this. Now as I sample a shadow, watch what happens. Look at that. See how much warmer the shadows got? Again, I'll go back to light. Here was light, and here's shadow. You can see a clear difference. Light, shadow. You can see the light. Two things happen in the light. One is the color wheel goes ever so subtly toward, like away from the warms. It's traveling up. It's traveling this way. Now it's not getting very far because that grass is so orange. Its local color is so orange. The light, because the light is kind of weaker, the bully's a little weaker in this case, it's fighting that grass, but it's not carrying it all the way to blue. The sand has no local color of its own. I mean, it's very grayish already, so the bully is going to be able to pull it towards blues a lot more successfully. But because that grass is so orange, you know, the blue light is going to pull it towards blue, but only a little bit. Okay, but the trend is definitely clear when you sample the light and shadow, that light, look at the color strip here, look at the color wheel. This is shadow and this is light. See how it's going toward the blues? And as it goes towards those blues, it's also getting grayer. This is very similar to the color movement we explored in Chapter 1. And in fact, Chapter 3 is going to dive us into grays even more. For now though, let's continue on with cool light and do a little demonstration. As you can see, this photograph is lit with the same overcast bluish grayish sky, same as our swatch study previously, which means that the grass, the greens, and the oranges in that grass are going to be cooler up top and warmer as they turn under. And this has water as well, which I'll show you a basic principle for water. So again, I'm just doing my basic line drawing, blocking in the composition. I'm going to work with values and color at the same time this time, just to show you a more representative process of how I actually work. So just blocking in the elements of the composition. I like to work in red, just it's a preferred color. It mixes with paint easily. And as usual, I'll start with the sky. It's kind of this grayish, cool gray up there. Mix in a few different temperatures of that sky, maybe a little warmer in the horizon. It's kind of a classic thing, but again, very subtle grays, right? Then I'll work into the distance. And again, just like the Christensen painting, my goal is not to copy color for color. I'm just trying to understand the relationships, and then I'll actually start pushing them even further. So painting water like this is easy. The water is just a reflection of the sky, so it's a very light value. Here are some warm shadows coming in. So this is what I usually do, actually. I work with the shadows first a lot. So some warm shadows coming in. These are warm greens. I would term those warm greens. Greens that err on yellow and red, like that side of green. And then, of course, what that does is it leaves me room to both gray off the color for the cool top, which you can see right now, and also shift it towards the blues on the hue strip. It's subtle, it's a subtle shift, but it's a shift nonetheless. Okay, and the thing I like about this photo is there are a few different colors in the grass. It's not just green grass. There's like dead grass that's orange and different kinds of reeds that make all different kinds of temperatures like I'm laying in right now. Notice I'm relatively in the grays still. I'm just playing with and of course my Wacom tablet is adding opacity to it. Sometimes I will pick a more saturated color than I intend, and then with my tablet's pressure sensitivity, I can mix it accordingly. Kind of mixing colors on the canvas. So you can see how in the grass I've established a basic relationship of cooler lights, that is grayer and colder greens, and gray down oranges, and then warmer shadows, which are more saturated orangey greens. Trying to get the relationships correct. And at this point, I'm blocking in just some dark values in the background. Remember how I said trees are often your darkest value? This painting is an example of that, where the trees just catch the least amount of light. It's because they're perpendicular to the light. You know, if the sky is like a plane that's going horizontally through space, the trees are perpendicular to that. They're standing up and down, so they get the least amount of light, no matter if it's from the sun or from the cool light sky, whatever it is. The other thing about cool light in this case is, at least in a overcast day scenario, is cooler light is very soft. It's a very soft light. So you don't have to worry about hard edge shapes. That actually makes it harder, more difficult, I should say, because the transitions have softer edges, and it's always harder to control softer edges. A hard edge is, at least, it's a very identifiable edge. But in a cool light situation like this, you're dealing with soft edges. So I'll scribble the brush around. I'll make varieties of shapes. And I'll just try and get those colors to merge with softer edges, that's all. And you can see I'm doing that right now. I'm playing with the green, moving into the warmer oranges, but it's still a colder orange, right? It's not a very saturated, hot orange. It's kind of a grayed down one, subdued, because the blue light, just like in our cool light photo from half hour ago or so, the cooler light is making the orange grass grayer. Okay, it's not making it blue because the blue light is not strong enough. That blue light, it's a bully, but it's not such a strong bully that it's going to bully it all the way to blue. It's not that strong. So it's going to bully it toward blue by means of going into the grays. So I'm just laying in just some, just darker values back there. Just light and shadow. I'm only using average light, average shadow in this whole painting. Notice the trees in the background have a basic, an average light and an average shadow shape. Notice the grass in the foreground has just average light up top, and then the average shadow that it transitions to when it meets the water. And of course, evaluating what the correct edge is to merge those two shapes appropriately. And then plugging in color temperature this week, we can get in this case, a cooler average light and a warmer average shadow. And suddenly you're compounding your fundamentals. You got good values and good color temperatures. And suddenly, now you're a painter. This is what painting is. Any good painter, I'm just adjusting levels here, just getting some help a little bit. I felt I was a little too light overall. Any good painter is just doing this, okay? Brushwork and all that stuff is secondary. This is what's really going on in their heads. And then, of course, your personal style overlays on top of this. Like how you choose to move the brush, that's totally up to you. And at this point, all the color temperatures are in place. I'm just doing some ancillary stuff. You might call it detail, just little very small shapes, right? In terms of big shape, medium, small shape, I'm just doing some small shapes right now. Back to week number 1 stuff. Some small shapes just to get the illusion of detail in there. And just like that, we have a cool light study to complement our warm light study. All right, let's go through a little slideshow of paintings and just talk about what's going on color-wise. This is a painting by Paul Felix. This is a cold light painting, and what I love about this is it's so exaggerated. He's pushed the temperatures into like a caricatured realm. And the other thing I love is he's also using basically just 2 values per object. Either it's average light or average shadow. And of course, the average light is going to get a cooler color temperature than the average shadow because it's a cold light painting. For example, look at the straw huts, the rooftops. Where the light is, it's this purpley color, and then where the shadow is, it's this more warm orangey color. Okay, it's the same kind of local color, but 2 completely different temperatures of it. Look at the wall. The top face of the wall is this clearly blue color, fairly saturated even. Then by contrast, the shadow is this warmer purple color that's still in like the blue family, but it's closer to the red side of blue. Okay, textbook stuff. Look at the grass. The top where the grass is getting the most light is this cold bluish grass. Then on the bottom where the grass is more in shadow, it's getting a warmer green. And of course, Paul Felix has added his own personal magic by pushing these colors to their extremes in order to get a nice, fun, cartoony, caricatured look. Perfect for a Disney show. And on the subject of Disney, here's a concept color key by Ian Gooding for Tarzan. This one features a warm spotlight kind of bathing Tarzan and his immediate area, but everything else is lit by a cool light. You can see those 3 swatches at the top are all a variety of those blue-grays. Now the water is a different local color. It's kind of this greenish water. So in shadow, that water is going to err on the bluer side of green. And of course, he's kept it gray as well, kind of like doubly cool. Not only is it bluish green, it's also grayed down. Of course, this leaves tons of room for warms in the light. Look at Tarzan's skin. It's this really hot orange in comparison to those blue grays and green blues. And then the water in light is simply a warmer green, a green that errs more on the yellow side of green. Now I'm zooming in on this to see a little bit of fancy reflected light. Look at Tarzan in shadow. You see where the colors turn very red? That's just a nice bit of reflected light that works off the otherwise kind of cooler green shadows that you can see there and just gives it this flare of red. But you'll notice though that that red is still on the kind of cooler side of red. It's not the same yellow as the light skin. It's kind of dipping toward the cools. Yet it's still admittedly a very hot red to be seen in that cool shadow. Now, Ian Gooding has certainly done this for effect. You'll notice he's only done this on Tarzan. He hasn't done any of the background that way. And that's just simply to highlight the character. It's an artistic choice. Manipulating colors in the shadows is actually a very common technique. Here's a great figure painting by Xiaoming Wu. And look at those shadows. They radiate with tons of different colors, right? And by comparison, the light family is kind of plain. It does not have that same kind of play. Now, Xiaoming Wu has an interesting theory behind his color use. He says that light is where the drawing is, and shadow is where the color is. Now, let me explain what he means by that. If you recall back to this demonstration, remember how I was talking about reflected light as getting colors from all different kinds of objects? Well, that's what Xiaoming Wu is referring to. In the shadows, you have reflected light, and you can get colors from anywhere. You can get colors from the floor, the ceiling, the sky, other objects. There are so many areas for color to come from in shadow because of bounced and reflected light. Whereas in light, The light color only comes from one source, the bully. That's it. So in light, you can actually keep your thinking very simple. It's like that bully color is influencing everything in light, which means there aren't many opportunities for diversity. Then in shadow, you have the opportunity to open up and let so many colors come into your objects via reflected light. Here's one of my own paintings, and you'll see I use exactly that kind of thinking. Look at where the light is. These areas are in light, and it's a warm orangey, almost reddish light. So the colors in light actually become very predictable. They're all being pulled towards that red, the bully. And you can clearly see it. Look at the green fur on the monster. It's like yellowish, even orangish, because that red is pulling that green so strongly towards the red. The girl's dress and hair are being brought together in light by that warm red as well. Can you see that? They're very close in color. But then in shadows is where this picture really opens up and the color becomes very unpredictable. I'm getting reflected light from the water and it's ranging from blues to purples to cooler greens. His cooler pinkish red cheeks help to offset that area of cool for what I think adds a little bit of balance. There is blue reflected light coming from the sky, hitting the left side of the girl's face and hair. You see, there's so many options in shadow for color generation that you can really just have fun. And again, this is where there's no right and wrong color. You do whatever you feel you need to do for variety. And it doesn't even really have to be believable. Like the light in this painting is otherworldly because I've pushed it there. I've taken what is in the real world and just kind of caricatured it. So in this case, in my cooler shadows, I know that I should be within a realm of cool color. Like I can't just go adding warm oranges and reds in the shadow because it would compete with the warms in the light. So as long as I'm in the relative area of cool color temperatures, I'll be okay. Now, by comparison, this painting by Scott Christensen is more indicative of how color actually looks in real life. The sun is lighting the scene, and the sun is still a bully, but you'll notice it's not the caricatured, orangey, whimsical sunlight that I painted in my painting. This light is much more subdued. The sun is still bullying the colors in light to be warm, but you'll notice there are a lot more grays being used, and this is typical of nature. Nature works on gray. I mean, step outside right now, take a look at what's in light, and let me know if you see any super saturated colors. You probably won't. What you will see, though, is a strong comparison of warm versus cool, and that's what this painting has. If we compare this now to the shadow colors, look how clearly they separate themselves in terms of color temperature. The left swatch of shadow is clearly cooler than the right swatch of lights. Now look at the bottom of that shadow swatch. Those are getting into warmer cools. They're used as reflected light. That is, light bouncing from the rock or bouncing from the grass and bouncing up into the rocks that are in shadow. They add just a little bit of relief to otherwise a very blue area. Here's another Paul Felix painting, and I want to specifically address snow. Snow is very telling because it has no local color of its own. It's just white, and you can actually apply what I'm about to say to any white object. When an object has no local color, it gets all of its color from either the light or the shadow. So if you look at the snow in this case, any snow in light is tinted yellow because it's bullied by the sun, and the snow in shadow gets so much blue from the environment. Here's a similar painting by a Dutch painter named Peter Mork Monstedt. Look at the snow in this one. The snow is not only getting blue light from the sky, but it's getting reflected light from the trees. And you'll notice that the snow is not just cooler blue like it was in the Paul Felix painting. It has intricate touches of warmer blues, grayed down oranges, grayed down greens. It's a symphony of grays in there that really helps this painting pop and be very realistic. And to offset that complexity, look at the snow in light. It's very simple. It's essentially one color, one value in light. Very predictable. So this ties back to Xiaoming Wu's theory of how in the light you play with just drawing, and in the shadows that's where the color is. Alright, let's now move into chapter 3, where we're going to continue building our foundations, especially in connecting grays to hue shifts.